the growth of the industry, and then there are the dominance, the trend, and then also talk about the resilience. Just to recap in case people join us first time, growth, well, you look at both growth and resilience. Growth, let's say, is like in a football game where you can score a lot of goals. You can be growing, can be encroaching and taking other people's market share. Resilience is to stop people doing that to you, to that company. Stop people from encroaching into your market space, from taking away your customer. So a successful company needs to be very good at both in the next decade. Having one is not sufficient. Okay, let's look at the business of TSMC. TSMC has got a very simple business. It's only got one single business segment, which is a foundry. Okay, what is a foundry? I just share with you. Okay, Intel is a very famous company, which makes a lot of computer chips. They call it integrated device manufacturers. So what they do is they will design their chips. So what are semiconductor chips? Semiconductor chips are like the brains of all our IT equipment. For example, the sensor. Right? For example, like let's say, how will the phone knows, by the time, when you put your phone in the car, very hot temperature, it will actually shut down. How does it know? Because it has sensor. And sensor needs the semiconductor chip to be the brain. So the semiconductor chip is the brain. Without semiconductor chip, all our IT equipment cannot function. So it's a very necessary thing, a very important thing today and going forward. So Intel basically designed the chips. So they do the designing and they do the manufacturing. Manufacturing is where the technology lies. So they do the manufacturing and they do the selling. So Intel basically only largely caters to personal computers and servers. TSMC is a pure breed foundry, which means they do only manufacturing. They don't do any design. They don't do any selling. And hence, they'll design, the people who design the chips are the AMD, Broadcom, Apple, NVIDIA. And then they will give it to TSMC to do the manufacturing. And then TSMC will hand it over to sell the chips. So because of this, TSMC is able to gain the trust because they know that, let's say if Apple were to let, or let's say AMD, more direct competitor of Intel, if they let Intel manufacture their chips, they run a risk of Intel not wanting to do a good job for them because they are their competitors in selling the chips. But when it comes to TSMC, there's no such risk because TSMC is only doing purely manufacturing. They don't design, they don't sell. So they will not be a competitor of their customers. Later I'll share with you how they did. In fact, TSMC was the first company to do this in the whole world. And later I'll share with you how was TSMC born. Okay, so this is in the TSMC's annual reports. So they say that this foundry segment, the revenue is likely to grow in mid-single digits compound annual growth. However, the company expects its foundry segment to outpace that. So my own guess, long term, well, I think I'm putting it about 10% growth for foundry, which is actually very decent. 7% means 7 years, it will double. The money will double. And that is very decent for me. Okay, so talk about market share as a third quarter 2019. So you can see this is only for those pure foundry companies. A foundry means they only do manufacturing. I'm repeating that. So TSMC basically is the big brother. Right? So it is having 50% of the market share. Samsung being number 2, but Samsung largely produces for itself, just like Intel. So the next global foundry, which is the third, but still losing money. So the TSMC is a clear leader in this area. And the market share is actually growing. Okay, and the competitors are dropping out. Okay, if you talk about this semiconductor, Yeah, so there's a law like they call it Moore's law, where every 2 years, in the past 2 years, they wanted to double the amount of semiconductor, I think quite transistor within the space. So they basically want, because the smaller the chip, the more power saving, the faster it can be. So there's always a global competition to make smaller and smaller semiconductor chips. And now we are talking about 7 nanometer. In fact, I think the research is currently of 5 nanometers. Yeah. And I think 7 nanometer is the size of a few cells. Yeah. Okay, I don't exactly know how big it is, but it's extremely small. So 7 nanometers, I would say only 3 companies are endeavoring to do it. So TSMC started producing it in April 2018, Samsung in 2019. And let me share the next news. So Intel was 2021. Okay, and Global Foundry, they decided to drop out because it's too expensive for them to be investing into this technology. Even they're losing money, they don't want to lose any more money. So they decided to drop out of this race. And this race is like that. There's an incremental learning. Later I will share. If a company don't produce 7 nanometer, it's very hard, not easy for them to jump to the 5 nanometer. If they can't even produce 7 nanometer, it's difficult for them to go to the next generation of 5 nanometer. This was the news that caused a jump in the TSMC price. So I think it jumped about 15% over the last 1 week. And the reason is because Intel said it's delaying the release of chips, the 7 nanometers transistors. So now they say that they will likely only be able to deliver it in 2022 or maybe even early 2023. Just now when you saw, TSMC already was producing this chip in April 2018. That means Intel is a good 4 or 5 years behind time. Yeah, so they have a lot to catch up. Intel previously was way ahead of TSMC. And today TSMC has caught up and went beyond. And Intel was saying, it's planning for contingency plans, which includes looking for third parties to manufacturing these chips. Yeah. So what he's saying is that Intel, instead of being a competitor, could become a customer of TSMC, as they outsource to TSMC. And could they eventually even drop out altogether? Previously, you know AMD, right? AMD is also one that makes computer chips for our PC. Together with Intel. The AMD used to also manufacture their own chips. And then it dropped out, and then now TSMC is manufacturing AMD's chip. We don't know whether Intel will also do that. Of course, if you do that, it will be a major boost for TSMC. Because first, you will have a major customer, and maybe lose a major competitor. Okay, so competitors are dropping out, which makes the road for TSMC a hit even brighter. Because there are really not many competitors. At the 7 nanometer space, we're talking about only 2, TSMC and Samsung. So TSMC, so they're talking about the growth. So TSMC can be growing because semiconductor chips is going to be needed at all kinds of IT devices. And we know we are in this case, we are in the age of technological revolution. And hence, we're just going to need more and more of this. I was just reading about autonomous driving. You know, an autonomous car, a driverless car, basically it gives out data of 1 gigabyte per second. 1 gigabyte per second. That's a huge amount of data. And all this requires semiconductor chips to process. So we're just going to see an explosion in the needs of a semiconductor. So that paints a very bright future for TSMC. The second one is really the dropping out of competitors. So all these, I think, are going to enhance the growth of TSMC. Okay, but then how about the resilience? So it can be attacking, can it also defend? I think that will be important. What do you think are the competitive advantages of TSMC? I shared the last week. I briefly go through again. Cost advantage means they produce the same thing at the lowest cost, which makes them, I would say, keeping the competitors at bay. Secondly, efficient scale. That means this market can only support 1 or 2 dominant companies. If the third one comes in, everybody loses money. And the third and fourth is where we talk about where Microsoft competitive advantages were last week. Switching costs, where humans are habitual creature. Once we get used to something, we don't want to change. And that's switching costs. Network effect is also Microsoft, or most easily understood through credit cards. Because the more credit card user will make more vendor wants to install the credit card reader. And the more stores that install the reader will make more people want to carry the card. So it's a virtuous cycle. We call it network effect. Intangibles are things like brands, patents, which stops people from coming in. Because you have a brand, a big powerful brand that people identify with. So where do you think TSMC's competitive advantages are? I got some people who reply. Let me see. Okay. Modes, cost advantage. So that's written by Kelvin. Thanks, Kelvin. So just now, maybe I can comment on Kelvin's. So Kelvin wrote, another potential competitor is China's SMIC. Okay, let me share on that shortly. So the competitive advantage is cost advantage. Is a manufacturer for many companies like Intel. That's correct. Thanks, Kelvin. I just share on SMIC because as I shared with you, right? One of the news is TSMC will need to stop producing chips for Huawei as a result of this rivalry between US and China. Hence, I think China is on an overdrive to produce their own chips. So SMIC is one of their leading semiconductor in China. Currently, SMIC is producing 14 nanometer. So they are easily a few years behind. Maybe 4 or 5 years behind TSMC. How fast will they catch up? We don't know, but I say they are quite a distance behind. So I say not an immediate threat. Longer term, we need to watch out. But thanks, Kelvin. So I share the two advantages are cost advantage. But just now, Sherry mentioned, right? It costs 12 billion to build a plant. The plant, they call it a fab. 12 billion to build a plant. So can you imagine if it's not fully utilized? So two major costs. One is the cost of the plants, which Sherry just now said 12 billion. On average, it's about 9 billion. But the plants going forward will be more and more expensive. Plants includes the equipment. They are very expensive. Like to produce those 5 nanometer chips, one equipment is $100 million. Produced by ASML. So that's just one. And the R&D cost. Because to be able to string the chips requires a lot of R&D. So I think all this, a lot of upfront cost is sunk in. And if I cannot produce enough, then actually the company runs into loss. I'm not sure if you all can still remember, Singapore used to have a homegrown semiconductor foundry. Who remembers that? What's the name? Can anybody type in if you know into the chat? I can't remember. It's Temasek own. A foundry. Creative, venture, no. Chartered. Winnie is my friend. It's called Chartered Semiconductor, which hardly ever make money. Almost every quarter they lose money. So if they make money in one quarter, cause for celebration. Because they don't have the skill. So today this Chartered Semiconductor is bought over by Global Foundry. The Chartered Semiconductor. So they don't make money because they don't have skill. And hence a lot of foundry cannot make money. Even the third largest, Global Foundry, they're losing money still by the billions. And so I say cost advantage is very important. The fact that TSMC has half of the market, that is a very, very powerful cost advantage. Because the cost for producing, for setting up that plants, plus R&D costs, can be amortized over so many more chips. And the second one is intangible. Because I say it requires learning. The technology of chips lies with the manufacturer. And hence it's incremental learning. As I say, if I can't produce 7 nanometer, it's very hard for me to go to 5. And hence it could mean that I could not proceed anymore if I stop. Yeah, like Global Foundry, they stop at 7, which means they have to be content to take the lower margin, lower technology part of the market. Yeah, whereas those that continue to innovate can capture the higher margin, higher price part of the market. So the intangible assets is very important. The learning while manufacturing. Okay, so this is what I'll quickly go through. So it's TSMC's revenue recurring and diversified. So if you look at it, you only got one business segment. So it is not like a extremely diversified, but the end demand is pretty diversified. Unlike Intel only manufactures for PC and server, TSMC's end market includes half the smartphone. HPC stands for high performance computing, which includes the AI. So this part will be the fastest, I would say, rising segment. All your AI, autonomous driving, yeah, that part will drive the HPC. And of course, the rest of it, as you can see. So I say reasonably diversified. Although it only sells semiconductor chip, but at the moment, I cannot see the world substituting semiconductor chips at the moment. Yeah, so I think that you can say do pose a risk of focus, but I say it's very low because I don't see it going out of fashion anytime soon. Recurring as well, it's not really like recurring like Microsoft a subscription model, but to me it's good enough. You know, like if you want everybody who wants to manufacture something, a technology device, would have to have some sort of chips to it.